I read the entire Wheel of Time series in 2.5 months. 15 books, 4.4 million words, 2,782 characters in 2.5 months. I know, kind of insane. But 2020 was the year of the pandemic. I happened to be unemployed for a big chunk of the time. So what better time than that to dive into the world of epic fantasy? So this is my spoiler-free reflection on my journey through Wheel of Time, what I loved, what I hated, and my thoughts on whether or not you should read it. What is Wheel of Time? Well, Wheel of Time is often referred to as one of the most epic fantasy series. It's a 14-book series with a prequel written mostly by Robert Jordan. The first book was released in January of 1990, and Robert Jordan continued releasing books up until about the time of his passing in 2007, with the 11th book released in 2005. He left extensive notes with his wife and editor, Harriet McDougall, and the author that they chose to complete the series, Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson was supposed to complete the series with one final book, but there was so much content left over by Robert Jordan that Brandon ended up releasing 3 final books, which came out in 2009, 2010, and 2013. Recently, Amazon decided to pick up the series and do a TV show. So like the books, this is expected to be epic, maybe the next Game of Thrones or better. Either way, it's super exciting, and Wheel of Time readers everywhere are very excited about the TV adaptation. So the quickest spoiler-free plot summary that I can give you is that Wheel of Time follows the story of 5 young characters from a forgotten village, and it is their mission to try to save the world from the shadow. Yes. Throughout their journey, they are often thwarted, but sometimes aided by the very complex world, incredible cultures, and the magic system that Robert Jordan imagined. So let me tell you about my journey reading Wheel of Time. Prior to 2020, the only fantasy I had really read was Harry Potter, which I loved, Lord of the Rings, also pretty good, and I tried to give Game of Thrones a try, but couldn't make it past halfway through the second book. 2020, I set the goal for myself of reading 20 books, which was kind of low. Then the pandemic hit, and I actually ended up reading a bunch. I think I ended the year with 80 books, and towards the end of the year, my older brother Nathan asked if I had read any fantasy books. I told him I hadn't, and so he recommended to me a free book that you could find online, Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. After I finished that and told him I really enjoyed it, he said if I was looking for a commitment, a long series to read, I should check out Wheel of Time. So I didn't know much about the series when I started. All I had was my brother's recommendation, the fact that it was finished by Brandon Sanderson, who I had read 1 book from and enjoyed. It was my brother's recommendation, the fact that it was finished by Brandon Sanderson, who I had read 1 book from and enjoyed. Nathan also told me that they were going to do a TV adaptation of the series. I was always a big fan of that as a communication major in college. I took some media classes. Love book to movies, love book to TV series, just really find it fun to see how other people imagine a story that you have already created in your head. So after devouring books 1 and 2, I had to wait a couple of weeks until I was going to see my brother, who let me borrow books 3 through 11, and this is how I finished those. I had to acquire the next couple of books. I ended up getting access to books 12 and 13 on Kindle a couple days after I finished New Spring, and then I had to buy book 14. So I think from start to finish, it was a grand total of 80 days, not including those 3 weeks in December when I didn't have access to the book. There was also a few days in there when I didn't read because I had, you know, like work and some other things going on, and when I was trying to acquire the last few books. But just over 2.5 months. It was a wild ride. That was a lot of reading in a short amount of time. Obviously, I was very invested, or I wouldn't have been that into it. So with all of that, let me now tell you what I loved about this series. But first, I'm gonna grab a kombucha. So today I'm trying my whiskey barrel-aged kombucha. I started homebrewing this about 6 weeks ago. It's been sitting on the counter, so it's built up a little bit of carbonation. If you want to see more about this experiment, I'm gonna post that video soon, but let's see how it is. It's tasting pretty good. Okay, much better. Can you see me? Yes. All right. So what did I love about the series? Well, the world that Robert Jordan creates is so complex, and the characters that he develops are unlike anything I've ever read before. With 14 books, there is so much that can be accomplished. There's so much we get to see and experience that I felt like I got to know these characters, like they were my friends. When I ended the series, I was bummed because I no longer got to hear about what was happening with these people that I had invested quite a few hours into. Another thing I really loved, there was many surprises along the way. There was things I didn't expect. There were also some really big anticipatory moments that entire books led up to. These were really exciting, really kept you drawn in and interested in learning what was going to happen next and how those situations were going to evolve. Another thing I really loved is that Robert Jordan has a really interesting way of taking some potentially controversial topics topics and infusing them into the storyline in a way that is super thought-provoking. Again, I don't want to provide any spoilers, but there's some really interesting gender dynamics that play out throughout the series. There's some really interesting takes on non-monogamous relationships, and the way he does these in this world that he creates is very unique and really gives you a chance to think about your own thought processes and perspectives and how in a different culture things may look and feel very different. I appreciated that element of the story. Okay, so another thing I loved, and this may be an unpopular opinion, is that there isn't a lot of super long drawn out battle or war scenes. I am not a big fan of that type of content, and I felt like while that is infused in various elements because it's essential to the storyline, it wasn't so much that it was taking over the story. It was a good balance of some action, but not too much that I got bored with it. So there were a lot more things that I loved about this series than I hated, but there were a few things I found super annoying and did not love. First, Robert Jordan's writing style is very long-winded and descriptive. This is great in the fact that it helps you imagine and build these worlds in your own mind, and they're very complex. However, when you're reading these books back to back, it gets really repetitive and kind of redundant. I think if you're reading these books over the 20 years that they were written and released, it wouldn't feel quite so repetitive because that element of the really long descriptions would probably help you remember parts of the storyline. However, if you're reading them back to back, you might get a little frustrated, annoyed with the overly descriptive and somewhat repetitive nature of what happens in some parts of the books. Okay, the second thing I hated. Robert Jordan uses some ridiculous names in this series. As I mentioned before, there's something like 2,782 named characters. That's incredible, but some of the names are super bizarre and super similar, and so there were many points in this series when I couldn't even keep characters straight. And if you try to Google that, you're going to find spoilers, so do not Google things if you decide to read this, even if you're just trying to keep characters straight, because you will see things, important things, that will spoil future storylines for you. Speaking of characters, the third thing I didn't always love so much about this series was the flow or the pacing of some of the storyline and how the characters were involved in that. There's entire books where important characters don't even show up. And while certain books really aren't covering that much time, to miss that character for an entire book, I didn't like that. Sometimes it was my favorite character and all of a sudden they're gone for an entire book. I found that flow and that pacing to be a little bit weird, not my favorite component. Okay, so I mentioned that one of the things that I loved about this series was that there were so many big anticipatory moments that happened throughout. Well, I stand by that. However, I also found some of those big moments to be a little bit underwhelming or even a little confusing. I'm trying to think if I can say this without spoiling anything. Yeah, I mean, there are certain character confrontations that we're waiting for entire books, and then when those happen, it's really underwhelming. So something I both love and hate about this series. All right, my final thing that I hate, and I think this is a legitimately unpopular opinion. I did not love the final book. I didn't love it. I experienced so much with these characters. I followed them on this incredible journey, and the last book did not give me what I wanted. And of course, the authors have the right to do what they want, but I really wanted more. Again, doing this without any spoilers is so hard. There's a big event, the end of the series, and then it's a pretty abrupt ending. And I thought we would get to learn more about what happens after the big event, what happens with the characters, everything along those lines. And while much of it is pulled together well and loose ends are tied up from the series, I still wanted more. Okay, so those are my big thoughts. Now, whether or not you should read it, that's a hard question. So I'm gonna ask you some questions. Do you like very descriptive, sometimes repetitive storylines and character development? If so, yeah. Question number 2, are you willing to commit potentially hundreds of hours to a series? And the series varies throughout. The first book isn't a super great representation of what the writing style is going to be like in the next few books. So are you willing to kind of trudge through that? And then there's this whole section that people often call the slog, where things are a little bit slow, like 3 whole 600+ page books are the slog. Are you willing to persevere through all 15 books? Do you have a lot of time? Do you like long series? If so, this one is epic, but if not, why bother starting? Maybe just wait for the TV show. Okay, so I would love to hear your thoughts, opinions. Did you feel the same way? Have you read the series? Did you start the series and couldn't finish it? I would love to know in the comment section below. There's a crazy fandom out there for Wheel of Time. It is so cool to see that community. I haven't really delved into it too much, but I hope some of you will comment below with your own thoughts and feelings, spoiler-free, in my comment section. I've also linked all of the books below if you think you might want to give them a try. I would say overall that I loved it. I'm so excited about the TV show, to see the characters develop, to see the storyline and the cultures that they create. I think it's gonna be awesome, and I think like Game of Thrones, there's gonna be a huge following. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts again. Give me a like if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Cheers.